Hi. Hoping that it'll prove worthwhile, I've decided to do this look at the Huns and my involvement, my passion for them, I suppose, over many years. It's partly inspired by Ralph Astley's video on, among other things, his Mongols. And it involves personal history as well as looking at the Huns themselves. I mean, the best thing I could do really is for anyone who is interested or is inspired by the Huns is to point up some books and just briefly to talk about these sources of miniatures that I have. I got into the Huns as a teenager. I got a little, young person's book out of the library and immediately got caught up. It had reproductions of etchings of Victorian paintings, of which there are some that are rather splendid. There's a famous one of them flying past a Roman temple. It's a symphony of greys and browns, and they're on sort of fairground horses that have got all their hooves in the air, which is, how horses were represented running before Degas and Muybridge, and photography generally had its impact on how we knew about how horses moved. But that little book from the library really inspired me, and I wanted to get Huns. And so my collection of Huns began in the 70s with Hinchcliffe. And these 25mm figures in the foreground here are they. I never got a full army together. Some of them, actually, horses and riders, are sort of converts mixed with other things. I did a lot of adding things like plasticine quivers, I don't know how I got the symbols on the shields so right, actually. Looking back, I'm stunned by some of these. I don't know if you can see them, but they've got very Hunnic symbols, and I don't know how I did research in those days without the internet and things being what they were. But they were painted with gloss in so-called enamels. They're not enamel, but those little Humbrol tins of oil-based paint. But using the gloss because I didn't want the paint to wear out, which is true. The paint hasn't worn out, but of course the gloss is not that attractive. As a whole, though, I think these are rather marvellous. They're like Ralph's Mongols. They are often ill-formed. They're not very anatomically inspiring. They've got, sort of globular elements to them. But Hinchliffe in the 70s, they were, these horses, these little ponies, are an attempt, a brave attempt, it seems to me, to get an idea of what Hunnic original steppe ponies, which may, to my mind, be related to the medieval palfrey, which had this extraordinary gait, the amble. but this is a real attempt to get the look, it seems to me, of Hunnic steppe ponies, which, as they came into the West, they definitely replaced with what you see here as a much larger horse for the nobles, for the heavier cavalry, which is more armoured, and is only now survives properly in that one figure of mine of these. And then here is Attila himself, who's on an amazingly ugly mount. And I don't know what this figure is and where it came from. I've no idea. I think I either found it or bartered for it or something somewhere. It's a one-piece cast, except that the arm is replaced somehow from something else. I wanted an impressive sword, the sword of Mars that Attila was meant to have had. Anyway, there he is. And he relates quite well, it seems to me, to this figure on this Osprey. I don't know whether it was actually based on that, but Osprey Elite, Angus McBride illustration. This is a marvellous evocation of the Hun from John Worry's this much loved book. This is a book that I'd highly recommend anyone to get hold of if they possibly can. Came out in the 70s, bit later actually. I was already into the Huns before this, and it also got me into Alexandrian, Macedonian, and all sorts of other things, and hoplites, and gosh. But it's a wonderful book. John Worry, Warfare in the Classical World, familiar to a lot of people, I'm sure. But this illustration of a Hun just absolutely confirmed my feelings of almost romantic feelings for them, for their freedom, and for their wildness. And as you can see, it's got lots of other wonderful illustrations, and it goes right from Minoans through to the fall of Rome. There's a late Roman here somewhere. It's got battle, wonderful maps, battle diagrams, Roman cataphract, pictures of actual sculpture and objects. I don't know where the late Roman. This is Augustine. Anyway, but that one illustration of a Hun was an inspiring thing for me. On the books about Huns, actually, let's just quickly look at this. This is, as I said in the previous video, my newly based, really, army of Huns, 15mm, mostly Lurkio. And they're fiddly to put the riders together because they're in two parts, but I do recommend them, actually. They're very fine little 15mm figures. There is here, it's modest compared with Ralph's wonderful Mongol tent camp, but this is my little DBA indicator of a Hun camp with some sort of skull and flag out the front there. So apart from the Ospreys, of which the best two are this Catalanian field, the Battle of, one which is impressive in its depth. This old one, which is rather out of date, but, you know, is worth having a look at. There's various books here on barbarians. This one, Attila the Hun, which that little rider is from that Victorian painting that I was. It's been graphically transposed and changed, but basically taken from that painting that I was talking about, the Victorian painting. That's a good book, and Christopher Kelly, he's quite respectable. I think he's Cambridge based. There's some more picture type faffy books, generally on barbarians, another book on barbarians, and this, another book on Attila the Hun, has some interesting background work on the current Hungarian who has reconstructed Hun horse archery very, very convincingly and can fire something like 10 arrows in a single pass at full gallop, accurately, all of them hitting a man-sized target. Astonishing. And he points out that, people would have, the Huns would have grown up riding on sheep as toddlers before they could walk and shooting bows all their life, and they were probably, even more capable of doing that. So they were amazing. The book, in a way, is Otto J. Hinchliffe book on the world of the Huns. It is a tome, and it has the most amazing detail in it. And I just want to show, that's the head of a Sarmatian, by the way, from Trajan Column. I just want to show this picture, which, relating back to Hinchcliffe's picture of what their modelling of what a Hun horse would look like, a steppe pony or horse. This is a very good. I suspect they actually, because this book came out about that time, I suspect they may have even looked at this illustration. When you take one of these little Hinchliffe models, it looks astonishingly like these two. Actually, I think it's one and it's reversed. Models of a horse, of a Hun horse. Possibly Hision Nu, actually, and they may have been the same as the Huns, or they may have been the people also responsible for the westward great roll of movement that caused the migrations. Anyway, and read, in relation to that picture, a quick description. Those shaggy and snub-nosed, allegedly too small to ride upon ponies. There's a Roman author here as well with a quote, if I can find it. Basically, they say that they're ugly, thin, rather barrel-chested though, big-boned, big heads, and the Huns are almost glued to their horses, which are hardy, it is true, but ugly, and sometimes they sit on them woman fashion and thus perform their ordinary tasks, natural functions, and when deliberations are called for about weighty matters, they all consult for a common object in that fashion. They sit around on their horses on the side, which I suspect the illustration in the John Worry is actually based upon that idea, the Hun sitting side saddle. The characterization of the Hun horses as deform is too vague to draw conclusions from it. To a Roman, most steppe horses must have looked as misshapen as the horses of the Scythians, with their short legs and big heads. Anyway, there you go. That is part of what makes this a wonderful book to look at if you're Huns, if you can get a hold of a copy of it. I got hold of this some years ago from Abe for not very much, and it is the work, really, I suspect, still on the Huns. And there's one of their wonderful cauldrons. That one without the mushroom shape at the top. Here we are. So, it's full of wonderful things. Where am I? I don't know. Full circle. Back here, I'm just painting two more of these 15mm Lurkio Huns at the moment. Because I wanted to make the numbers up, and also for sheer enjoyment sake. I love them so much, and it's all of this is really, I suppose, an exercise in nostalgia, adolescent enthusiasms and this sort of thing. But it's a good moment to be looking at Huns, because at the moment at the British Museum there is the most marvellous show of the Scythians. You probably caught some of the hype if you're in Britain, and it is really worth going to see. I was surprised at how easy and relatively quiet it is compared with, say, the Viking show at the British Museum. It occupies the same space as the Vikings and the Celtic show did, and it's just as worth seeing. It's splendid. Lots of astonishing objects of great vitality in it, and I couldn't help but buy the catalogue, which is, I've got to be careful not to crush the Huns. I can't, it's physically difficult to show this, but it's full of fantastic objects like these. And pieces made in felt or leather to presumably roll up because of the nomadism. Look at all these boar, which would studded the clothing, gold, all of them punched out, pressed out. Marvellous helmet there.